officially live, so people are going to come and go. Well, actually, we're not. It's loading. I'll show you what I'm seeing because this is awfully. I know this is awfully exciting for all of you. Never mind. It's not going to allow it. So I'm guessing that I'm live now. Is anyone that's my friend in Facebook, did they get a notification that I am live? Yes, no? Doc says yes. Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Tim Gager and this is the Dire Literary Series, and you are the first experimental Facebook Live folks here, and I hope you're here to see Kim Chinquee read. Kim is known as the queen of flash fiction, but instead of doing the awkward intros, what I would like to do is, I guess I've lost that ability to screen share because of my new technology. Oh, that's awesome. Anyway, so we won't do it. But what we will do is I will introduce Kim. Kim grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin, and you got here late. You missed that conversation. She served in the medical field in the Air Force and is referred to as the queen of flash fiction. She's published hundreds of pieces of flash fiction and nonfiction to journals and magazines, including The Notion, Plowshares, Noon, Story Quarterly, Denver Quarterly, Fiction Story, Notre Dame Review, Conjunctions, and others. So you can check out Kim and her books at kimchinquee.com. And without anything further, I'm going to turn it over to Kim.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everyone, for coming. And I'm going to be reading some pieces that are forthcoming in my my new book, Snow Dog, which is coming out with Ravenna Press this fall. I got bookmarks in the mail today, so here's a little peek at the cover. It's a little backward in the back. And so thanks to Joan Wilking for putting these together. A lot of these pieces are obviously have dogs in them, and a lot of them have snow. Some do not have snow, some do not have dogs, some have cats. So there's a little mix, but there's a kind of common theme running throughout. So I'm going to read a couple pieces that were published in Conjunctions and Big Other. So I'm going to start right away. This is called There Was Double Rainbow. The first night of the auction, there was a double rainbow. This was after storms blew things across the yard, and the porta potty, there for the next day's auction, fell over. The rest of the family went to the site where the valuables were auctioned, things like antiques and jewelry, furniture, old dolls, and the sewing machine my grandmother used to patch up my old clothing, lamps. I'm not sure even what exactly went, because I was the one to stay behind at the farm to make sure no one came along to steal stuff. All over the yard, things were assembled, chairs and boxes of utensils, an old washing machine, blankets, rugs, the crib my mom used to sleep in, and me too. In one of the sheds was a piano, church pews, a bench. Outside the machine shed was lined with rows of tractors, a lawnmower. Inside the machine shed, tables were filled with boxes of dishes, tools, tires, old radios, appliances, and hoses. I'd been at the farm all week, having driven from New York with my dog Spiff. I had my hybrid bike on a rack on the back of my Toyota. We drove through Canada, across Michigan, then took the ferry from Ludington to Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. It's a ferry ride I know, mostly from the 4 years I lived in Michigan, and my Aunt Sue from my dad's side, who died 3 years before, would be the one to retrieve me. This time I took my car and left Spiff in his dog seat, which meant there was a special section in the ferry for cars with dogs, where they got a lot of air and proper circulation. The last time I was at the farm was after Uncle Carl died that February, where I carried his ashes down the aisle with my cousin Joe. Carl was a godfather to us both. Carl owned the house that used to belong to my grandparents and their grandparents. It's where my mom grew up, where I spent a lot of time when I was growing up too. The day after the funeral, I went into the house with my mom and her siblings, my sister and her husband and her other cousins. We wore gloves and face masks, tried to bring down cobwebs. Dead bugs stuck to the webs. The blinds in all the rooms were shriveled. We took sheets away to get laundered. We went through boxes of papers. We swept, we cleaned, we dusted. The house was huge, made of 7 bedrooms, a parlor and a den, a living room, a dining room, a kitchen, 2 bathrooms, a mudroom, a big kind of lounge upstairs, and closets big enough to be labeled as rooms of their own. The attic in every room was full. Every closet, every drawer contained stuff. My last time before that was probably before my grandma died. She died the same year I got my degree from Southern Mississippi. Her funeral was on the day of my graduation. Instead of walking across the stage, I was at her funeral. I drove up from Mississippi with my son, and my uncle Carl, the one who ended up running the farm, walked with me through the cemetery, offering me tissues. My grandmother, I learned, was buried next to my childhood sweetheart, who shot himself in his early 20s. I had known about his death and had heard about it after it had happened, but I didn't know his plot was next to my grandma, and where my grandfather would later be buried, and later the ashes of my uncle. After my grandma died, my uncle had their dog Lou euthanized. I'm not sure why. My grandfather went to assisted living. My uncle took over the farm. He rarely invited anybody over. Most of my other family members lived nearby, so I opted to stay at the house during my visit. I brought a cot and stayed in the room that used to belong to my mother, the room where I used to stay when I'd visit. Of course, now it was mostly empty. I vacuumed it. I spread out my cot. I brought a dog bed for Spiff. By the first night of the auction, we were pretty much set. I was tired. We all were. There was my mom, my Aunt Blue, my sister Sal and their spouses, my cousins and my sister. They were all at the auction site. I sat on one side of the sofas to be auctioned. There'd been a hole that my family had hired someone to dig, where we threw stuff like the chair where my uncle died, because it wasn't salvageable. We had to have the hole covered before the auction for liability reasons. All the animals were sold by now, save the wildcats that still came around. I was still in awe by what was left of my grandma's garden. I remember helping her harvest cucumbers and tomatoes. Sprouts of rhubarb still came up, asparagus and onions. I picked them, cut them, tried to cook them, and used what I could with what was left of the kitchen. But on this night, a storm came. It blew everything all over. It rained and it thundered. I tried to call my family, but no one was answering. Okay, and that one was published in Conjunctions, and that was actually published as nonfiction, but I changed some things and turned it into fiction. So the next one is how dogs experience in the world, how dogs experience in the world, and this is kind of a follow-up to the one I just read. I smelled the sweat of myself in the oversized fuchsia tank I bought the week before at the local dollar store, where the smell there was stale and cold, the smell of a warehouse, save maybe the aisle filled with candles. That was just after driven from Buffalo, New York, through Canada and customs, taking the ferry from Ludington, Michigan to Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, then to Green Bay, a route I'd taken several times before, this time with my dog Spiff. I'd read a lot about how dogs experience the world with their noses, and I wondered then how this one smelled to him. Spiff mostly stayed inside because it was so hot out. I wondered if he smelled the death smells. My uncle died there just 4 months before, as did his mom, my grandma. And in going through one of the drawers from my many upstairs dressers, I found a host of black and white pictures of dead people in caskets. When I asked my mom, who was there with me getting ready for the auction, she said it was probably somebody in the family, that back in those days, our ancestors used to have wakes at the house in the parlor. But people were also born there. Over 60 years before, one of my mom's 50-some cousins took his first breath in the same room where my grandmother took her last. That cousin Bob was there at the auction on a rented golf cart. Cancer ate at his bones, and it was just an ordeal for him to get there. I remember the smell of manure, the smell of butchering chickens, plucking the feathers, burnt skin, the smells of my grandpa making breakfast, the smell of the chalk on the board in the common area where, as kids, my many second cousins would play school, even sitting on desks that must have come from someone's town hall classroom. The smell of the basement, playing pool there, the smell of the queue, the smell of popcorn when my aunt was still there and would babysit for my sister and me. The smell of curry from a dish I made just a few days before, using vegetables my ancestors planted, and though the garden hadn't been tended to in ages, these dear things still made their appearance. As I cooked, I added spices I'd brought, savoring the smell of cumin, the balance of fennel, ginger, garlic, nutritional yeast. I tasted as I went. Sorry. I sipped the broth, and when I asked my mom if maybe she would like some, she took one taste and said it was too salty. Now the place smells like lots and lots of people. Outside, groups of farmers with hats and work shoes move in a pattern, following the auctioneer from wagon to wagon, tractor to tractor, from one plank filled with stuff to the next one. It smells different than my last farm auction, the home where I grew up after my parents' divorce and my father's nervous breakdown. I was 13 when that happened. It's 34 years later. I sit here with that, holding my dog Spiff. He's a rescue. I pet his thick fur. He pants. He tilts his head and looks up at me with his little bulging eyes. His mouth is so small. His breath is like magic. Okay, how much longer do I have?
You can read a really short one if you'd like, and we'll do some questions.
Okay. This one was published in Friction. It's really short. Like most of mine are, the ones I just read are a little longer than most of my stuff, believe it or not. This is actually the last piece in the collection, Snow Dog. A dog ran down the highway. He came in from work carrying firewood. He smelled like the string cheese I packed in his lunches. I packed lunch for him every single day after cooking him oatmeal for breakfast. I had dinner prepared too. I also had a career. I had a super long drive to get to work, which wasn't exactly a picnic. He put down the wood and bit my neck. He grabbed my boob and felt it. The record player I'd just unpacked was broken and behind us. "What are you doing?" I said. "Molesting you," he said. "Oh no," I said, "you're not." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. Hold on. I have to unmute it. It's always kind of strange when you finish. I've unmuted people. They can share their appreciation for you, which is awesome. It was a great reading. And
Thank you.
now we have some questions. But first of all, the live stream doesn't really identify you. So if you're tuning in on the live stream, this is Kim Chinquee, and this is the Virtual Diary Literary Series. And Kim wants everyone to know that her favorite bookstore is Powell's Books that you can order online. So help with the indie tours. So we have had a few questions. I have a question from Amy who says, "I'm always interested in the blend of memoir and fiction. And anything you'd care to share about memoir and your work and family reactions to this?" And she says she loved your reading.
Thank you. I read a lot from autobiography. I don't know why. I'm just drawn to it. I think there's something in me that just, when I see something, something from an angle, I like to take note of it, or even something in life, even if it's a odd sense of something happening in a relationship or in an event. I just like to write it down because it helps me try to figure out the world a little bit. I mean, I don't know, more or better, or or it makes me more curious. So, but I do tend to fictionalize because I like the liberty of it. If I keep something nonfiction, I sort of I feel like I'm drawn, like I'm stuck in the facts, you know. So I like the liberty of fictionalizing. And regarding your question about family reactions, yeah, that's one thing. It is art. So if family asks me, or friends or anyone, you know, I have the liberty to fictionalize certain things, and because it's art, and it's up to the reader's interpretation to decide what they think is true and what isn't. So there are a lot of, you know, some might be able to see some parallels between my life and my fiction, but just because there are parallels doesn't mean it's exactly true. So I like the liberty and the freedom and the wiggle room that fiction allows.
Or now, other writers that you know, which writers do you feel influenced your work? And do you, second part of this question, which is not even a part of this question, is have you ever considered taking one of your flash pieces and turning it into a larger work?
I have. It's a real challenge for me. I have a real difficulty writing longer stuff. Um, what I've done a lot of times is write one flash and sort of continue it, so it's a series of flashes. So actually, I have a novel coming out next year with Widow Orphan House, and it's called Battle Dress, and it's a series. It's a novel in flashes, so it's basically a sequence of novels. But I have taken flashes before and expanded them, or like the first two pieces I read, the first one was originally a lot shorter, and I expanded it to make it a little bit longer. And I'd actually started working on a book that's about the family farms in a nonfiction book, but that got sort of put on hold because I got turned this into a collection. So yeah, I think it's yeah, I think that's a good thing that fiction allows you to do. You can sort of balloon it out, but a lot of times I end up shrinking it even more than the original. And I've worked with Diane Williams from Noon Magazine a lot, and she's really her editing has really showed me a lot about how to really just condense a flash into something that's more powerful and using a lot of more interesting language and images and that kind of thing. So.
Speaking of Noon Magazine, our next question is from Lisa, and she said she's a huge fan of your work, and she first discovered your stories on Noon and was blown away, and inspired her to start writing flash fiction herself. So she's curious about your writing schedule. How often do you write? Where you do it, and etc. And when did you start writing? So if you need me to go back and re-ask, because I know there's like 4 questions in there, I will. So
no, I think I got it. Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Well, I'll start by how I started writing. I was in the Air Force, and I was in the medical field. I joined the Air Force straight out of high school. So because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Wasn't sure about going to college. I wasn't sure about many things, but luckily the Air Force gave me a really good job as a medical technologist, and got married and had my son and was overseas. So, you know, by the time 8.5 years rolled around, I thought, well, there's something else out there for me. So I got out on a program called Palace Chase, where you can separate from the Air Force, but you owe your time in reserves, twice as much time. So I got out and worked as a medical technologist for a while, and then started looking into classes. I had been going part-time while I was in the Air Force too. So, but I was going to major in physical therapy. But then I realized I'm not really good at physics. So I took a creative writing class, and I basically fell in love with it. So as a fiction writing class with Tom Williams, and he's now in Arkansas. and I just kept going with it. And then I went to graduate school at Southern Miss, and then I went to graduate school in the University of Illinois. And when I get to the to segue onto the noon question, when I was in graduate school at Central Miss, not Central Miss, Southern Miss, I'm sorry, I was studying with Frederick Barthelme and Mary Robeson and Steve Barthelme, and Mary Robeson had challenged us one day because we had a gap in the workshop. So when she called to write a piece of flash, and so I was like, I don't know what flash fiction is. So I wrote a pretty small piece, and it actually went over very well. And I sent that piece to Noon, and it ended up getting published. So that was 2002. And Diane Williams has published. I've been in every issue since. So I've just kept. It's really tough to get in there, but she's very she's a very integral editor, and I've learned a lot from her, and she really does take care of her writers. So it'd be a really big disappointment if I'm not in the next issue at Noon, because it's been 18 years in a row, or 19, and so it's sort of my calibrating point. It's like, was I in Noon this year? Yes, I made it. She takes probably about 10% of what I send her, if that. So.
Who are some of your favorite writers?
Lydia Davis, Diane Williams, Amy Hempel, Rick Moody. A lot of the authors who I studied with, Rick Barthelme, Steve Barthelme, Mary Robeson, Rick Powers, Jean Thompson. I read all their work. A lot of my friends. Susan Henderson. She's working on a next novel. I mean, I could give you a really long list, and it's just I can tell you. Yeah, those are some of my earlier favorite writers, and who remained still my favorite writers.
Remember when you came to Cambridge, we talked about Susan Henderson because she grew up in the same town that I grew up in, which is.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Right.
So the last question tonight is always my question, which, has the big buildup. So since you moved to Buffalo, it's said that Buffalo has like 22 or 23 sunny days a year. Do you feel that weather component and the darker dankness of the city of Buffalo has affected your writing at all?
Yes and no. Winters are pretty tough here, because I think those gray days are in wintertime. Summers are beautiful. I love summer in Buffalo because it's sunny. This year's been really hot. There are tons of places to go, like on the water. Like I live about a block away from Lake Erie. There's Niagara Falls is 20 minutes away. If you go a half hour south, there are a lot of hiking trails. So definitely Buffalo. The Buffalo summers have definitely made their way into my writing. This is to kind of go back on the last question too. Somebody asked, how often do you write? Like, what's your writing schedule? I made a point beginning of this year, because I wasn't writing as much as I wanted to write every single day. So I write one flash a day, and I have an online writing group. That sort of took, there was a week here and there where I kind of had to take off because I was moving and stuff, and life gets in the way. But so definitely it definitely makes its way into my writing. I write a lot about, I walk a lot, I run a lot, I bike a lot, I swim a lot, and sometimes while I'm doing those activities, I think about how I'm going to put it in the writing, or in the stories that I'm writing. As far as the winters are concerned, definitely the Snow Dog probably wouldn't have gotten written if I was living in the South Towns across from a ski slope until this February. So a lot of buffalo is in that collection too. So definitely, I do write about a lot about landscape and about the places where we live. So buffalo is definitely it's like a character in my work. Um, yeah.
Great. I'd really like to thank you for coming and reading and answering questions. So these are some of Kim's books from her website, which is kimchinquee.com. And some flash fiction. Look for her novel coming out next year, and also a nonfiction book about her farming experience and her family farming experience in Wisconsin. And her bookstore to support is Powell's. So they are a indie bookstore in Seattle, and you know what? When you want to get Kim's book, you just use the search, and well, and there it is. So, and while you're there, pick up books from anyone that you love through Pals, because that would really make the indie bookstores happy. And so we were here one more time for Kim.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
I'm going to use my broadcasting experience here. So if you're here in the Zoom room, we'll continue with the open mic. Those of you tuning in to the streaming service on Facebook, good night and good luck. Oh, I almost totally screwed up and hit end meeting for all.